At a time when every model was expected to look the same, Lauren Hutton appeared as a shocking deviation. The gap between her front teeth, once considered a fatal flaw in the fashion industry, landed her on the cover of Vogue and made her the highest-paid face of the 1970s. But the price of that difference was far from as dazzling as the runway lights. Few people knew that behind her free-spirited beauty and seemingly careless smile was a childhood marked by abandonment, growing up with the feeling of never truly belonging anywhere. Lauren Hutton entered fashion not from a glamorous dream, but from a need to survive, to support herself, to be strong before the world could hurt her again. Independence became instinct, and also the armor that kept her standing alone. When her career reached its peak, she signed record-breaking contracts and appeared on countless magazine covers and acted alongside top stars. Yet alongside success came broken relationships, accidents that nearly took her life, and decades of loneliness because she refused to trade freedom for safety. Lauren Hutton did not choose the easy road. She chose the honest one. Her story is not only the journey of a fashion icon, but the quiet tragedy of a woman who dared to live outside the standard, dared to age in front of the camera, and dared to pay the price for being herself. What kept her standing when the spotlight began to fade? And is freedom truly a gift or a lifelong solitude? Before she ever stood still inside those frames, Lauren Hutton had already learned very early on how to steady herself in unstable spaces. She was born in 1943 in South Carolina. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her childhood was not tied to a home with a fixed rhythm of life, but drifted through moves, short pauses, and then movement again. The environment she grew up in was quiet in a way that forces one to notice the smallest changes. In post-war America, where the nuclear family was seen as one of the rare anchors of stability, evening sometimes meant someone sitting at the table without touching the plate. The next morning, the bowl would still be in the exact same place. Her mother lived with severe depression. Dinners happened quickly, words were few, and the sound of a knife touching a plate rang sharply in the empty kitchen. There were days when a room held the same stillness from morning to afternoon. Windows open, curtains undrawn, and no one asking what would happen next. Her belongings were often kept in 2 cardboard boxes, one open, one tied with string. Hutton grew used to placing herself inside that rhythm, observing before stepping forward, waiting for the air to soften before speaking. Very small tasks repeated steadily. Clearing the table, washing dishes, going to bed on time. Waiting did not appear as an event. It existed as part of daily life. At school, Hutton often stood at the edge of groups. She watched relationships form and dissolve before taking part. Classes passed in familiar order. Her presence did not need to be marked by reaction or explanation. When she reached adulthood, Hutton studied journalism. Lecture halls, reading assignments, and exercises in recording everyday life created a clear structure. Writing emphasized observation and documentation, keeping distance from the subject being described. There were no plans aimed toward the stage or the camera. Those school years unfolded quietly, steadily. After graduating, Hutton left South Carolina for New York. The city opened itself through short-term jobs, brief auditions, unfamiliar rooms. No long-term schedule was set. Movement came first, choices followed later. And those early years were not arranged as preparation for modeling. They unfolded as a process of learning how to exist in new spaces, standing still, observing, waiting for response. The reflexes formed early began to show when she entered rooms where light and gazes determined who was allowed to stay. New York received Lauren Hutton in the mid-1960s with small rooms and short appointments. One audition took place late in the morning in a studio rented by the hour in Midtown. The lights came on before she had time to adjust to the space. The person in charge of layout flipped quickly through a portfolio, looked up at the face in front of the lens, then paused a beat longer at the mouth. Hutton was asked to close her lips, tilt her head slightly to the left, keep more distance from the camera than usual. No comment followed. The test ended with a polite nod, and the room emptied quickly, as if no one had ever stood there. A few days later, a sentence was placed in a hallway between two rushed appointments. No chairs, no paperwork. Just a familiar piece of professional information delivered in a neutral tone. If she fixed her teeth, the opportunities would widen. The phrasing carried neither pressure nor negotiation. It appeared as an obvious adjustment within the system, something everyone was advised to do and expected to accept. Hutton listened and nodded out of courtesy. She asked very little, took no notes, did not ask for more time to think. The exchange ended as quickly as it began. A few days later, there was no confirming call. The familiar working rhythm closed quietly, and other appointments continued to fill the newly opened space. The fashion industry then operated by a very narrow standard. The favored face had to be smooth, even, able to fit into any composition without adjustment. Small differences were treated as details to be corrected, not elements to preserve. In that system, Lauren Hutton was almost pushed out of high fashion before she had entered. The remaining invitations came from another pace: catalogs, small advertisements, shoots for direct retail sales. Those sessions were steady and predictable. Familiar studios, stable lighting, pre-marked compositions. Hutton arrived on time, changed outfits, stood in assigned positions. The camera turned on, captured the required number of frames, then shut off. The income was just enough to remain in the city. Work schedules were written by the week, not extended too far ahead. In those layouts, a Hutton was rarely placed at the center. She stood off-axis or served as background to the overall image. Her name appeared regularly on lists, but never circled. No one said she was unsuitable. No one called her a safe choice. Her presence existed at a just enough level, not removed, but not prioritized. Her first years in New York moved in the same rhythm: auditions, waiting for feedback, then moving on. There was no plan to adjust her image to advance faster, no decision to remake her face to fit the system. Hutton did not resist, nor did she try to turn her difference into a statement. Her face remained unchanged. The work remained steady. Her name stayed on the back page of the model board. Not crossed out, not circled. By the late 1960s, that working rhythm entered another kind of pause. Not because Lauren Hutton's image had changed, but because the system around her began to show very small signs of fatigue. Auditions lasted a few minutes longer. Some frames were no longer discarded in the first round. The familiar comments about necessary adjustments grew less frequent, replaced by longer silences in selection rooms. Fashion at that time was approaching the limits of the very standard it had upheld. Faces that were too perfect became difficult to distinguish. Smooth compositions repeated too evenly to create difference. In editorial rooms, the question was not spoken aloud, but present in the choices kept for one more round. Was there room for an image that did not need to be completely flattened? Lauren Hutton entered that gap naturally, not as a challenging choice, but as an option simply not eliminated. Her frames were set aside rather than crossed out. The light was loosened. The distance from the camera remained. No request for correction followed. No one said this should be tried, but no one offered a convincing reason to stop. From those selections kept one round longer, her images passed through 3 consecutive rounds. It did not resemble a gamble, but a next step already prepared. When a face not designed to represent the old standard was no longer suited to be removed. At a certain point, the center of the frame was no longer something to debate. In 1970, Lauren Hutton appeared on the cover of Vogue for the first time. The decision was not tied to a theme that required declaration. It happened in a brief editorial review, as cover options were spread across a large table and flipped through out of habit. Some frames were rejected almost immediately. Others were kept for additional passes, not because they were superior, but because there was no clear reason to cross them out. The review stretched into late afternoon, when the light in the room had softened. Prints were stacked in thin piles. The first sheets moved quickly, then the rhythm of turning slowed. Hutton's frame lay among the middle group, not striking, not rejected. The distance from the camera was greater than usual. Light did not press tightly against the features. And the familiar angles used to assert perfection were absent from this selection. On the contact sheet, a few frames were lightly circled in pencil without notes. No one said they were better. No one gave a reason to discard them. A test print was placed on the cutting table. The cover sheet was turned sideways, then upright, set beside other options, removed, then placed back. The room held silence longer than necessary for a technical decision. No large question was raised. Only glances that lingered a few seconds more, then moved on. The light was opened slightly. The space around the face was kept. No suggestion was made to edit the image to make it safer. No request to intervene in details usually adjusted before print. When the final decision was recorded, it was written as a workable option. This image could go to print. The issue was finalized on schedule. No accompanying introduction. No sign that the choice required explanation. The cover appeared on stands like any other, blending into the magazine's steady flow. Yet in the way the light was placed, in the distance maintained between face and frame, the test print preserved the open space around her features. There was no request to soften the gap between her front teeth. After that issue, the rhythm inside editorial rooms did not change completely, but shifted just enough for those inside to notice. Reviews ran longer. Some options once discarded in the first round were kept for another pass. Contact sheets were no longer decisively slashed. Instead, thin circles, question marks at the margins remained. No meeting was called to evaluate impact. When the issue reached stands, sales were compiled like any other. No fluctuation large enough forced a return to the old standard. Numbers passed across desks, were reviewed, then set aside. In subsequent cover decisions, light was tested at greater distances. Compositions opened, leaving more space around the face. Angles once considered safe no longer held absolute priority. Lauren Hutton's name appeared again, not regularly but often enough to no longer be treated as an exception. Acceptance inside did not happen all at once. Some saw this as an aesthetic risk, a choice that could tilt a trajectory stable for years. But as issues continued without obstacle, the choice remained. Not because it was defended by argument, but because no data proved strong enough to remove it. The standard did not collapse. It shifted gradually through decisions that required no explanation, through options kept for one more round. Lauren Hutton did not enter the center through a declaration of change. She was there because that image continued to be chosen, not as a symbol of the new, but as a choice the system had grown used to being unable to cross out. 3 years later, in 1973, Lauren Hutton signed an exclusive contract with Revlon. The figure attached to the agreement, estimated at over $1 million, was not spoken aloud like a declaration, but it was enough to change the way the room looked at the person seated at the table. At that moment, it was a price never before set for a model, and it came with a level of detail in the terms that had rarely existed before. The contract was thicker than usual. And it did not only cover duration and payment, but clauses concerning image rights, scope of appearance, limits of permissible retouching, details not to be altered. Each page was turned slowly. Each item was read back clearly. Before the first shoot, the key points were briefly restated one last time, as if to close every ambiguity that had once been common in earlier agreements. During the first sessions, the industry's familiar rhythm began to slow. Lights had to be reset several times before settling. Some compositions, once considered safe, were set aside. When test prints were placed on the table, certain details were not softened as usual. People in the room looked again, exchanged short remarks, then moved to the next frame. There were no long debates, but the smoothness once expected was no longer there. These adjustments did not stop in the studio. A shooting schedule planned for the following month was never reconfirmed. Another project ended at the inquiry stage. No cancellation email, only no further reply. In a brief phone call, an intermediary said that it was difficult to arrange more right now. Work calendars that had once been filled by the quarter began to show gaps without warning. Hutton's name was still mentioned in internal conversations, but accompanied by more cautious notes. A few brands chose other options. Some invitations were never sent. The remaining shoots proceeded with fewer choices, fewer calls, and longer intervals between projects. As if the market were quietly adjusting to a new structure it had not yet fully grown used to. Hutton's working days kept the same rhythm. She arrived on set on time, stood in marked positions, waited for the lights to settle. When the camera stopped, she stepped out, changed outfits, then returned to the next frame. The conditions she had set did not change. The work continued, between the contracts that remained and the doors that had just closed without explanation. In 1980, Lauren Hutton appeared in American Gigolo. That presence was not framed as a career transition needing explanation, nor promoted as a bold experiment. It came at a moment when Hutton's image was already familiar to the public gaze, accustomed to being placed at the center without introduction or manifesto. The film was released at a time when American culture was shifting rhythm. Fashion, the body, and urban life were placed side by side on a deliberately cold, polished surface. Within that space, Hutton was not constructed as a focal point meant to draw attention. She appeared as a natural part of a new visual structure, where beauty was linked to distance, to choice, and to control over one's own image. The response to the film quickly moved beyond cinema. American Gigolo entered fashion, advertising, and the imagination of urban lifestyle in the early 1980s. In that flow, Hutton's image was not separated from her modeling past, nor did it need to be redefined. It was placed into a different context, more mature, sharper, while retaining the characteristics that had shaped it before without added explanation. That reception did not rely on the role or screen time. It lay in the way the image was seen. Hutton did not need to prove ability through expression or dramatic peaks. She stood in the frame as an already complete image, capable of existing alongside contemporary cinema without adjusting the traits once considered different. The boundary between high fashion and popular culture, therefore, narrowed, not through declaration, but through repeated presence and acceptance. The film's cultural success spread in that rhythm, and with it, Lauren Hutton entered the new decade not as an experimental choice, but as part of the contemporary visual language, where fashion, cinema, and urban life met in the same cadence without needing to be named. Afterward, some scripts arrived with clearer offers, leading roles with greater screen time, accompanied by requests to adjust her image to fit long-term promotional strategy, from hair and lighting to character construction already defined. Hutton read, marked, then folded them closed. There was no formal refusal, only that her schedule was not reconfirmed. Those projects moved forward with other actresses. Her later appearances in film followed the same rhythm. Step in, stand still, move on. A supporting role sufficient for the face to be recognized, and a scene that closed without extension. Between screenings and promotional prints, her schedule broke into small intervals. One appearance, then silence, before the screen lit up with another face. Hutton entered roles without altering her appearance to fit the script's demands. Characters were not pushed into easily readable emotional zones, nor was her presence prolonged on screen through strategic choices. The appearance occurred just enough, then stopped. Within that structure, the role of Michelle Stratton remained like a solitary marker, not because of screen time or narrative power, but because of how the character was held, at a measured distance, without explanation, without trying to occupy the center. That image became linked to a film that shaped the aesthetics of an entire era and stayed in memory as a frame that did not need to be repeated to remain effective. One afternoon in the mid-1980s ended abruptly on a hot, empty road. The sound of metal scraping hard against asphalt came before the motorcycle slid, the body of the bike spinning sideways before stopping several meters away. Hutton fell to the side, her body weight hitting the ground before she could brace herself. When the bike finally stopped, she lay still for a few seconds, breath uneven, joints no longer responding as intended. In the hospital, diagnoses were given piece by piece. Fractured bones needed stabilization. Soft tissue was deeply damaged, swelling and bruising spreading. Lacerations had to be stitched, leaving tight pulling sensations with each movement. A body accustomed to standing straight before a camera was now held in braces and bandages, movements restricted to very small ranges. The following days were divided by prescriptions, injection times, and regular checkups. The light in the treatment room remained the same, not changing with the time of day. Recovery was slow and uneven. Some mornings it took many minutes just to place weight on a leg. Some pains came late, appearing after things had seemed stable. Walking required assistance. Sitting for long periods became difficult. Every movement had to be calculated in advance. How to turn without pulling a wound. Where to place a hand without touching a painful area. The working rhythm once familiar, standing long hours, moving constantly, holding posture under lights, was no longer possible for a long time. Recovery time was counted in weeks, then months, with no clear point of return to the old schedule. The body demanded a different rhythm, slower, more closed, where progress happened in small increments that could not be forced. In that silence, everything outside continued to move. While each day's focus narrowed to very specific acts. Standing up, walking, and holding balance long enough not to fall again. The first photo shoots were postponed for a clear reason. The body could not yet stand continuously under lights. Another filming schedule was delayed for several weeks because movement was still difficult. After that, empty days began to appear in a calendar once filled months ahead. In some projects, Hutton's name remained on the initial assignment sheet. But as the shooting date approached, another line of text was written over it, small and neat, like a technical adjustment. A call came late one afternoon, while the follow-up appointment schedule still lay on the table. The voice on the line went straight to the information. Next week's shoot would use someone else because that schedule required standing for many hours under lights. No one asked further about recovery. There was no offer to reschedule, just an operational standard read aloud, then closed like any other booking confirmation. When the call ended, the calendar page still held the written date. Only the work attached to it was gone. After that, exchanges stopped exactly where they had been. Hours once familiar with the sound of ringing phones passed in silence. The answering machine held no new messages. A few preset appointments were crossed out, then left blank. and work that needed someone standing in the right position continued to be filled, just no longer requiring the same body. The withdrawal from the lights happened in very small steps. A camera test ended earlier than expected. At times, she had to sit down midway while the lights were still on. After that, her name no longer moved to the final confirmation round. The familiar operating rhythm continued, while a position once accustomed to her was gradually used in another way. Outside, the absence was mentioned in a few short lines in print. The accident was retold briefly, alongside older milestones. There was no announcement of leaving the profession, no confirmation of a return, just news items that closed quickly to make room for a newer face on the next page. Her life shifted to places without print deadlines. Longer trips, a small suitcase, a few folded clothes. Days began without alarms set for call times. Mornings opened slowly, light entering the room in segments, the body deciding how far it could go that day. Some days were only a short walk, then a rest on a bench by the road. Some days required stopping midway so the breath could settle before continuing. Time was measured by the number of days staying in one place. No car schedules, no one waiting in the lobby. Each movement was carried out according to that day's capacity, becoming a natural part of daily life without needing to complete or prove anything. Those spaces did not enter the newspapers. There were no images with captions, no pre-assigned narrative. The distance from the lights formed that way. An invitation set aside, and a call not needing an immediate reply. An appearance postponed, then passed. The distance from the public grew gradually, enough that older images were not brought back into use while the body was still recovering. Those years passed in a silence with shape. Blank calendar pages, places where no one recognized her, and a career paused without needing to be named. Then, near the end of the 1990s, an invitation appeared. No slogan, no reference to the past. Lauren Hutton arrived at the shoot on time, carrying very little personal gear. In the room, the lights were set higher, softer. The camera was placed at a distance wide enough for the face to appear fully, with the marks of time remaining where they belonged. The lights came on and held their position throughout the session. No request to change angles midway. The camera observed from the chosen distance, recording small movements. The way she stood still while the photographer adjusted aperture, the way her shoulders relaxed once the light settled, the way her face kept its familiar breathing rhythm. The shoot ended on time. No extension, no attempt at alternative setups. In the review room, prints were placed on the table, the photo paper still carrying the smell of fresh ink. One frame was turned slightly to align its axis. Another was kept as it was, without retouching. Wrinkles appeared clearly under soft light, not hidden, not softened. The composition was opened, so the image had enough space to stand still. Pages were rearranged, placed beside younger faces, then kept in that order. The issue went to press. On the stands, the image appeared within the familiar flow of contemporary fashion. No special introduction line, no explanatory caption. Viewers paused a little longer at that page, then turned on. The work continued in the magazine's usual rhythm. After that, invitations came steadily. Another shoot, then another. The schedule was written in pencil, not dense, not sparse. The lights kept the same setup. The camera did not move closer. On the editorial table, Lauren Hutton's image was placed down as part of the present moment unfolding without needing to recall what had passed. That presence extended in a quiet cadence. Work continued, one issue to the next. The position no longer needed to be asserted nor pushed out of frame. Time appeared as a visible element, on the skin, in the posture, and in the way the system adjusted its rhythm around a body that had passed through many phases, still standing before the lens. Lauren Hutton's private life unfolded in that same rhythm. There were no milestones to mark, no images to update. Relationships formed outside the frame, you moving parallel to work, not requiring visibility to exist. In the early 1970s, Lauren Hutton met Bob Williamson in New York, in small studios rented by the hour, places where shooting schedules were filled quickly and crossed out just as fast. Their first meeting happened as the lights had just been turned off. People in the room began taking down backdrops, pulling pins from foam boards, stacking contact sheets still warm with ink. Williamson stood slightly aside, camera hanging low, making a brief comment about a frame printed off-center. Hutton passed by the table, paused for a beat to look at the stack of images just set down, then continued to change. Later encounters repeated under similar conditions, present as work neared its end, leaving the room as the studio emptied. No appointment to record, no opening story to name. The relationship formed from moments at the edges, where the lights were off, and life returned to those who remained standing in the room. They lived together in a repeated rhythm. Mornings opened in the same room, 2 suitcases against the wall, sometimes open, sometimes closed, depending on each person's flight schedule. There were trips long enough that belongings did not need rearranging. Stretches of staying put between projects, when both happened to be home at the same time. Those days often ended with a late meal, the kitchen light on longer than the living room, contact sheets set on the table then pushed aside. Some mornings began slowly, as with no car call time, only the sound of a calendar page turned lightly to check the next day. Their relationship took shape through such concrete acts, opening calendars together, comparing flight times, switching travel orders so no one had to rush. When one needed to slow down, the other adjusted. There was no marked moment, only one day linking to the next within the same daily rhythm. Presence was maintained through repeated gestures, steady enough to become familiar. Their love appeared in small details. 2 sets of keys placed side by side on the table. Luggage packed according to the other's habit so nothing had to be searched for in the morning. Evenings when they returned to the same room from different trips, only managing to ask about tomorrow's schedule before sleeping. Decisions were often made in silence, like a natural adjustment rather than an agreement. For many years, Hutton kept her private life separate from her public image. Not to hide it, but because that rhythm did not need presentation. Her relationship did not produce incidents for media to pursue. It existed alongside work, quietly and steadily, present without needing a name. She did not enter marriage through familiar sequences, yet shared life did not unfold in emptiness. It appeared through repeated spaces, and through familiarity accumulated over time. No ritual marked it, no transitional moment defined it, only staying, long enough for presence to become the background of life. During that time, the idea of motherhood passed through Lauren Hutton's life. It appeared, then receded, alongside work, long travels, and a life rhythm always opening forward. There was no single moment named to end or decide. Time continued, and possibilities adjusted in other directions. Not having children, therefore, did not take the shape of a lack. It existed as part of the life structure Hutton maintained, where attachment was present, but did not necessarily lead to every form conventional models often require. A possibility once there gradually moved to the background, leaving a life rhythm that had settled in her own way. In her relationship with Williamson, Lauren Hutton was fully present, in her own manner. She kept independence, not dissolving, not placing herself in a position needing validation through status. That brought freedom while also requiring a quiet endurance. Without external structures to support it, every bond had to stand on its own. When that relationship, lasting more than 20 years, reached its end, it closed in the same rhythm in which it had existed. No day was marked, and no concluding conversation. Travel schedules thinned, evenings no longer coincided, shared items returned to separate places. Presence withdrew little by little, slow enough not to cause disruption, long enough to become permanent. After that, Lauren Hutton lived alone, but her life did not shrink in the sense of absence. It simply changed rhythm. Meals became simpler, hours more flexible, trips decided quickly and lightly. Luggage stayed light, a few clothes, a few familiar items. Time no longer had to be divided according to someone else's schedule, so each day opened according to the capacity of her body and her mood. The house remained in a steady state throughout the day. Morning and evening differed little except for the light outside the window. Objects moved rarely. There was no disruption from many people coming and going. The quiet was not something to fill, but something to live with. In that space, a few simple things were not present. No child's chair beside the dining table, no corner of the wall for family photographs. Rituals that might have taken place, crowded birthdays, milestones prepared long in advance, did not enter her life. They were not treated as losses, only as possibilities that once existed and then receded as life moved in another direction. One day followed the next in similar form. Choices already made were not brought back for reweighing, and they rested in life like objects long placed in their proper spots, not looked at, but not gone. Alongside that private rhythm, Lauren Hutton's work continued in a direction distinctly her own. She stepped into photo shoots with a face that retained its familiar shape. The gap between her front teeth remained. Lines left by time were not softened into invisibility. As images were printed and circulated over years, they gradually became familiar to the public eye, no longer separated out as a difference needing attention. Adjustments began from behind the camera. Light was set farther back to preserve the true texture of the skin. Composition widened so the body could be fully present rather than pressed into a fixed mold. Backstage discussions revolved around degrees of retouching, around keeping inherent features intact. At first, these were agreements for individual shoots, then gradually became clauses more clearly stated in contracts. As a younger generation of models entered the field, the demand to flatten the face appeared less densely than before. Skin retained natural traces. Age was handled through light and angle rather than erasure. Aesthetic standards still existed, but the way the system operated around them became less rigid, more flexible. Lauren Hutton did not step forward to explain the shifts happening around her. She kept her familiar work rhythm, arriving when needed, leaving when the task was done. Over many years, the same face, unchanged in form, repeated across different frames, so that this constancy itself slowly became familiar to the eye. Beauty here did not open through declaration, but widened very slowly over time, as the system adjusted itself to work with a face that did not require becoming another version of itself. At 82, her life did not revolve around a single address or fixed schedule. Time was divided among familiar places, staying long enough for a room to become known, then leaving before it turned into an attachment. Luggage stayed compact. The calendar remained open. Decisions were often made close to departure, without long preparation. Daily life narrowed around simple acts, walking to keep the body flexible, reading, meeting a few old friends for quiet meals. Bonds were maintained through direct meetings, not public images. Most of her friends were people who had traveled many stretches with her, long enough that presence itself was confirmation. Work still appeared intermittently. A shoot, a short project, a moment standing before the lens under clearly stated image conditions. When the work ended, she left cleanly, not allowing private life to become an extension of professional narrative. The boundary remained. Work inside the lights, the rest outside. Looking back, Lauren Hutton's path does not appear through easily named peaks. It appears through the persistent repetition of the same face, the same way of standing before the camera, that while standards around her continually shifted. She did not rush to seize position, nor did she shrink to fit a mold. She kept her own rhythm year after year, letting time do the rest. Things once seen as deviations gradually stopped needing explanation, then stopped needing mention. At a shoot many years later, lights were set as usual. The photographer stepped back to measure distance. Lauren Hutton stood in the familiar spot. The face carried time's marks, not hidden, not emphasized. When the shutter closed, the image held exactly what belonged to it. The frame closed that way, still, clear, and long enough to recognize. There are presences that do not need to occupy all the space, but once they are there, are very difficult to replace with another face.